From where we last left off, we talked about what the world was like before the Lusitania came to the scene, the formation of the International Mercantile Marine Company by a man named J.P. Morgan, to the British government giving a loan of 2.6 million British pounds to George Burns to build two new ships that must follow strict regulations, to which were discussed previously, and the construction of the Lusitania and her sister ship the Mauretania to around this time were known as hull numbers 376 and 735 respectively, and the type of engine that is going to be used for these two ships. These ships are nearing completion and is about to be launched. Unfortunately, Cunard Line also dealt a blow of their own as well. The chairman of Cunard Line, George Burns, the second Baron Inverclyde, became ill and died on October 8th of 1905 at Castle Wimlis in Scotland. He would drive in the first rivet being installed on the keel, but would never see the Lusitania be launched off the slipway. Before his death, he became in correspondence since the previous March with Professor Ramsay of Glasgow University about the choosing the names of the two liners. The final decision to name both ships the yard number 376 Lusitania and the yard number 735 Mauretania were penned on February 15th of 1906. The name Lusitania came from an ancient Roman province corresponding to most of the modern Portugal. In history, there are 9 different ships named the Lusitania, but the one that we're talking about is from 1907, so we'll go over the 6th incarnation of the SS Lusitania from the Cunard Line. 7 weeks before the launch of the Lusitania, Cunard Line realized that the Lusitania has not yet been christened. So in context, they didn't have anyone to break a bottle of champagne against the hull and a godmother or sponsor naming the ship. So the purpose is to ask it for good luck and for safe travels for the ship, crew, and passengers in the very near future. Oh, and there's also one more thing as well to help differentiate to which incarnation of Lusitania around the time. I have 3 models of the Lusitania, and you heard that right, 3 of them. I will link them down in the description box below to where you can actually get them so you can check them out and own one yourself. So this first one right here is the Lusitania 2-in-1 model from Histobrick, which is the same company that made the ships that you actually see me do time-lapse builds of, such as the Carl D. Bradley, the SS United States, the SS Normandy, the RMS Titanic, and so on and so forth. This version allows you to build 2 different versions. This one is in its 1907 colors, to which we will go further along into the documentary in the next time about the Lusitania, and you can have this Lusitania in her Cunard Line colors or in her World War I colors. And everything is UV printed, so that way you don't have to worry about stickers or anything. And this next one right here is the previous model of the Lusitania in her 1915 colors. But unfortunately, this one is retired to make way for the 2-in-1 model that you actually previously seen me hold up. This has the orange band, which is on the bottom end of the superstructure, and the black funnels, to which you can actually switch them out to gray for your preference. And this last one right here is the Submersible RMS Lusitania from Print Hive 3D. Yes, a submersible model of the Lusitania is now available, and there's even one of the HMHS Britannic as well. This actually does come with a G-type torpedo and a display stand. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the torpedo on me at the moment, and I do have the display stand, which is basically right here, which does say Lusitania. Now, I haven't sunk this model yet. I've actually had this on display, but you can actually do check out Print Hive 3D models down in the description box below, and you can actually own yourself one of these. And check out the Discord server as well, and come join the fun as well. The first person that was suggested was Princess Louise, to which Cunard sent a letter to Captain W.G. Probert with an inquiry to Princess Louise to request that the princess's consent to launch the new ship, the Lusitania. But unfortunately, previous obligations made by Princess Louise made it impossible to alter her schedule to make it happen. Cunard turned to Lady Mary Ferguson of Inverclyde, the widow of George Burns. On May 11th, 1906, Cunard Liverpool informed the office in Clydebank of the news that Lady Inverclyde had consented to perform the naming ceremony. The news would reach John Brown. She would do it despite being in mourning of the loss of her husband. Then, on June 7th, 1906, guests and observers gathered prior before the launching to get the best view and a best vantage point. Then at 12:30, Mary, Lady Inverclyde, spoke a few words and blessed the Lusitania good luck to the ship and all of the crew that will serve on her and the passengers that will travel on her. She pushed the button to send the hull of the Lusitania down to the River Clyde despite a short delay. The ship was launched into the River Clyde without any issue. Anticipation did run high throughout the world for news of the launch. This even led to Cunard office in New York that they sent a cable message to Liverpool asking for a full report. Liverpool's reply was short and simple, notifying the Cunard New York office that the Lusitania is now afloat and no special incident happened and everything carried out as planned. Now, for Cunard to stay competitive in the North Atlantic trade route, the company had to ensure that the Lusitania and the Mauretania will be the largest, fastest, and most luxurious ships afloat. At their time frame, their accommodations were twice as large as their competitors, and the Lusitania can accommodate up to 563 saloon-class passengers, 464 second-class passengers or second cabin, and 1,138 third-class cabins. First-class accommodations would include a grand staircase, to which includes 2 gilded cage elevators and connected all 6 decks of passenger accommodations. The music room is located after the grand staircase, as it also had a skylight 20 feet tall with stained glass windows. It is decorated in a Georgian style with mahogany panels surrounded by a jade green carpet with a yellow floral pattern. The reading and writing room is the exclusive preserve of the women on board, just forward of the grand staircase on the boat deck, with walls decorated with carved pilasters and moldings marked out panels of gray and cream silk brocades, covered with rose carpeting and complemented with rose de Berry silk curtains and upholstery. The first-class smoking room is exclusively preserved of the men on board, as this room is located after the lounge and music room on boat deck A. The room is decorated in Queen Anne style with Italian walnut paneling and Italian red furnishings. The Veranda Cafe is located at the very aft end of the boat deck, just behind the smoking room. It is the first cafe on board a Cunarder, and even though it wasn't as popular in her early career, Cunard thought about replacing it with a gymnasium or a nursery. It would be later redecorated with ivy, trellises, and wicker work for a welcoming atmosphere. Usually in warm weather, the aft wall could be opened to customers of the impression as sitting at a Parisian sidewalk cafe in Paris. The staterooms on A through E decks range from one shared room to a variety of in-suite arrangements in a choice of decorative styles. The largest were the 2 regal suites on promenade deck forward of the grand staircase between the first and second funnels. Each regal suite would have 2 bedrooms, dining room, parlor room, and a bathroom. Portside would be decorated in the style of Petit Trianon at Versailles. The dining saloon was the grandest room afloat, and sat on 2 decks, shelter deck and saloon deck, and had an open circular well in the center. Upper floor seat can seat 147 and measured 65 by 65 with the room's port and starboard sides bounded by promenades. The lower floor would seat 323 and measured 85 by 81 feet and ran the width of the ship. The dining saloon is decorated in white plaster, gold leaf, and mahogany panels dotted with the Corinthian-style pillars, all crowned with a dome over the well and center of the room. Now, interestingly, the chairs were fixed swivel and were bolted to the floor, as seating that could be arranged did not appear until the Olympic in 1911. The second-class accommodations had their own deck house after the superstructure, as they consist of a lounge, which is the only public room and surrounded by promenade around the boat deck. The library, which is reserved for second-class ladies, smoking room, which is reserved for second-class men, measured at 52 feet by 33 feet and decorated with mahogany paneling, blue-tinted sliding windows, white plasterwork ceiling, and a dome. Second-class cabin staterooms are standard shared cabins on C, D, and E decks that could accommodate up to 4 passengers. Second class did not have suites, but they were very luxurious at the time. The dining saloon for the second class was similar in size for first class, but smaller and plainer. The original design could call for one floor for diners under a ceiling with a small dome and a balcony. It would be this room that would be important about the upcoming issue that will be discussed on the Lusitania. Third class accommodations on the Lusitania was plain, and compared to other ships of her time, third class accommodations were comfortable and spacious, with third class passengers even had a sheltered deck access with seating in a roofed and partially enclosed space. The ladies' room on C deck was located on the starboard side of the ship, close to the bow across from the smoking room, which is exclusive for men, and above the dining room. The cabins were shared, different cabin accommodating up to 6 bunks and a wash basin. This accommodation surpassed the typical dormitories and open berths of other ships. On July 27, 1907, it was all hands on deck for the Lusitania as it was time for a preliminary cruise or a builder's trial, as all the representatives for Cunard, Admiralty, the Board of Trade, and the shipyard came out to see the ship herself and have a shakedown cruise. At this time frame, the ship is under the command of James B. Watt, to which he would be the first captain of the RMS Lusitania, and ironically, during her trials, she would even have First Officer Arthur Rostron on board the Lusitania as well, as he wouldn't be famous until a little over 5 years later, but that's another story later. With the help of 6 tugs, at 11:50 a.m., the Lusitania backed out of the fitting out basin and turned to port, and began her journey downriver to Greenock, to which she would make it without any incident at 1:45 p.m. Lusitania's progressive trials would be held in early July of 1907, but there's a problem that needs to be addressed before her real sea trials. As the engine team put the vessel up to 25 and 25.5 knots, which is a requirement to the British Admiralty's requirements, thus generated the vibrations. But what actually did cause these vibrations? So the problem for the Lusitania is the vibrations were caused by the interference between the wake over inner and outer propellers, and they would actually get worse if the ship is turning. And you can actually see these are the 4 propellers. These are the outer and these are the inner ones. So basically their interferences between the wakes would actually get worse when the ship is actually turning, and it would actually plague this aft section of the ship, which the cabins, the aft end, were uncomfortable and uninhabited. Now keep this in mind though, that area is actually for a second cabin, so yeah, you can imagine how uncomfortable this area would be. I briefly covered this in my video about the SS Normandy. So basically, if you were in any of these cabins back here, when the ship goes up to full speed, it would actually feel like an earthquake as the engines would run. So Cunard and John Brown were actually worried about this, and they gathered the company's engineers and naval architects to draw up a list of plans to alternate the design. Then on July 6th of 1907, A.B. Harris of John Brown sent a memo out to James Mann at Cunard specifying the changes that needed to be done. As the Lusitania was anchored at the tail of the bank, additional work were later made to complete the liner while stiffening the stern section. Then on July 15th, the Lusitania departed for Liverpool and crossed the Mersey Bar at 5 in the next morning, and anchored off the landing stage. Basically, the Lusitania was dry docked, and upon inspection as the water was pumping out, designer Leonard Pescott and James Mann observed around at the 25 feet waterline the after shores commenced to vibrate and crack in one shore forward of amidships on the starboard side. The ship flowed out into the Canada Basin on 18th of July, and the graving dock was pumped out. It was ruled that the ship was placed on the blocks of the shores that were set up too quickly before the ship settled on the softwood blocks. Work would commence up until the 22nd, and the ship later sailed for Clyde on July 26th, as the Lusitania carried some VIP guests for a preliminary trial around Ireland. This would include Charles Parsons, Gerard Balfour, Lord and Lady Pierre of the Harland and Wolff shipyards, Mary Lady Inverclyde, Lord Stowbridge, Owen Phillips, and members of the Parliament who helped make both Lusitania and Mauretania possible. Another distinguished guest that would aboard the Lusitania for this trial was Winston Churchill. He was sent an invitation, but he was unable to attend, as he was sent a telegram saying, Very disappointed, not able to accept your kind invitation to board the Lusitania. Many thanks, Churchill. Lusitania left Trail of the Bank on Saturday, July 27th throughout the trial or trip. She received a cable from the Campania under the command of Captain Daniel Dow, which read, "Hearty greetings from Captain, officers and passengers of Campania. Wish Lusitania all success and her guests a pleasant time. And don't worry, Daniel Dow will not be left out of this story as he will make an appearance later on in this documentary." So Lusitania's sea trials took over a 3-day period, and the first thing that Cunard did was basically inform the British Board of Trade about the vibration issue, and then the Board of Trade would let Cunard know, well, what you expect is a new ship, you need to get that looked at. So the ship was actually very highly maneuverable and was actually get up to full speed to 26 to 26.5 knots, which is very, very incredible. And the next thing they did was a full-on stop from top speed, and they would actually run the ship to full astern to bring the ship to a full, complete stop. It actually took the Lusitania 4 minutes to stop the ship, which is very incredible. And the Lusitania would pass with flying colors, minus the vibration problems. When the Lusitania returned to the shipyard, the first thing Cunard did was to minimize the vibrations, was to add in reinforced steel arches and beams in the back end of the Lusitania, as they would have to take apart some of the second-class areas on the ship and rebuild them. They were successful adding onto the steel beams and arches, as they did help minimize the vibrations, but they did not go away entirely. The whole process of trying to minimize the vibrations would be something that the Cunard line would have to do for the rest of the Lusitania's career. And then the Lusitania was issued the certificate for the General Superintendent, Marine Superintendent, and the Superintendent of Engineering. She had been completed in accordance with all the requirements of the contract with the builders and the agreement with His Majesty's government, and is free for her maiden voyage, and was taken delivery on August 27th of 1907. In the next part, we will go over the Lusitania's maiden voyage and how she earned the title of the fastest ship in the world and the events that happened around the Lusitania in her heydays.